This is a response to an article called Bible and Wicca, aka Witchcraft, found on the Religious Tolerance website. The first point I want to make is that tolerance toward false religions is not a Christian virtue. It may be politically correct, but it is actually a sin to tolerate, promote, and defend false and wicked teachings and beliefs. The article attempts to show that four biblical passages, Exodus 22:18, Deuteronomy 18:10-11, Galatians 5:19-20, and Revelation 21:18 do not condemn Wicca. Two secondary sources are cited at the end of the article. One by a gay man named Alexei Kondratiev, an initiate of the Proteus tradition of witchcraft. The other reference cited was written by Paul Hume. I didn't find any information about him. I will deal with the biblical passages the article addresses one at a time. My sources are cited in the description box below this video. Exodus 22:18, Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. The article claims that the Hebrew word for witch, kashap, is a woman that uses spoken spells to harm others. Actually, the Hebrew word kashap simply refers to someone who practices magic or sorcery to enchant or use witchcraft. It should also be noted that the same Hebrew word kashap is used in other passages where the context is magic and sorcery, not a poisoner. See Exodus 7:11, Deuteronomy 18:10, 2 Chronicles 33:6, and Malachi 3:5. The article claims that the word witch, as used in Exodus 22:18, is not referring to modern Wiccans because Wicca did not exist at the time Exodus was written. But as I have pointed out, the Hebrew word kashap simply refers to anyone that uses magic like modern Wiccans do. So Exodus 22:18's condemnation of witchcraft also applies to Wiccans since they use magic as well, and Wicca is witchcraft. The next passage the article mentions is Deuteronomy 18:10-11. It reads, There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. An interesting thing about this passage is that it condemns all forms of the occult, so if one word does not specifically refer to Wicca or Wicca practice, another word does. The article proceeds to define 8 Hebrew words used in this passage. Wizard, as knowers, wizards, persons who make contact with spirits who are not of God, and then it says that this is not an integral part of the Wiccan religion. Even though not all Wiccans are wizards, spiritists, Deuteronomy 18:10-11 covers other aspects of Wicca, namely divination and witch. The article then defines consulter as making forbidden contact with the dead. Not all Wiccans do this, but those that do would fall under the definition of this word. The article defines divination as predicting the future by using lots or a similar system, and goes on to say that many Wiccans use tarot cards, runes, and scrying, etc. to foretell the future, but that these practices are not an integral part of Wicca. Perhaps unknown to the author of the article is the fact that the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia Volume 2 defines the divination in this passage as generally rendered divination is a general term for divination of all kinds. Divination, qesem, is translated into English as divination, augury, witchcraft, sorcery, fortune-telling, omen, lot, oracle, or decision. Since Wiccans engage in divination and since Wicca is actually witchcraft, they are also included in Deuteronomy 18:10. The article then defines an observer of times as predicting the future by interpreting signs in nature. I don't know where they got this definition from because we don't really know what kind of divination this was, but we do know that the word used here, anan, refers to divination, spiritism, magic, witchcraft, and soothsaying. I should mention that the words used for divination in the Old Testament are generic terms. They apply to many different forms. God condemns all forms of divination, so whether the form is ancient or modern, it is abhorrent in the sight of God. The next word the article defines is enchanter as perhaps a snake charmer because nahash means snake. We have never heard of Wiccan snake charmers. The article has given a limited definition of this word, Nahash actually means to practice divination, divine, practice fortune-telling, observe signs or omens, or learn by omens. I don't know where the author of the article got the idea of a snake charmer because none of my sources showed anything about a snake. The next word, they define charmer as not tying to perform magic and says that it is not an integral part of the Wiccan religion. I should point out that Deuteronomy 18:11 limits the definition of this word to charming, that is, casting a spell or tying up a person by magic. Concerning this word, the Theological Wordbook of the Old Testament, Volume 1, says, the act of charming is set forth as an idolatrous act and diametrically opposed to receiving revelation from God through his appointed prophets, Deuteronomy 18:15. The article defines witch as an evil sorcerer, a person using spoken spells to harm others, and it says Wiccans are forbidden to do this by their Wiccan rede. Actually, the word witch, kashap, as used in this passage, is used in several other passages as well. Exodus 7:11, Exodus 22:18, Deuteronomy 18:10, 2 Chronicles 33:6, Daniel 2:2, Malachi 3:5, and simply means to practice magic or sorcery, to enchant, or to use witchcraft. Since Wiccans engage in magic and witchcraft, the word witch, kashap, applies to Wicca. The last word the article defines is necromancer, and says it's a person who makes contact with the dead, probably by another method than sha'al, and goes on to say that some Wiccans engage in Spiritism, but it is not an integral part of their religion. I agree that not all Wiccans engage in necromancy in the sense of contacting the deceased, but the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, Volume 1, says that another form of necromancy is the utterance of secret knowledge by evil spirits, and uses the slave girl in Acts 16 and her divination as an example. The next passage quoted is in the New Testament, Galatians 5:19-20. It reads, now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies. The article claims that the word adultery is not in the earliest manuscripts. I'm not sure that is true, but even if it was true, it's irrelevant because fornication, porneia, in verse 19 is a catch-all term for all sorts of sexual aberrations, including adultery, homosexuality, and lesbianism. The article defines the Greek word pharmakeia, witchcraft, as the practice of preparing poisonous potions to harm or kill others. While it is true that pharmakeia can also mean medication, poisoning, or the administering of drugs, this is not the case in Galatians 5:20 and Revelation 18:23. In these verses, it simply means sorcery or magic. Finally, Revelation 21:8 is quoted. It reads, but the fearful and unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars, shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. The article claims that the word for sorcerers, pharmakous, is derived from pharmakon and means a drug, and gives three meanings: a person who uses magical potions to poison others, and a person who engaged in black magic to harm others, and they suggest a third meaning, which they claim is held by some commentators: a person who goes around spreading dissension, poisoning people's minds. In response, I would say that some manuscripts have the word pharmakous, which means a mixture of poisons or potions, magician or sorcerer. Thayer's Greek Lexicon defines pharmakous as one who prepares or uses magical remedies, a sorcerer. Thayer's page 649. But the word for sorcerers in this verse is pharmakos, which is a person that practices magic arts. Pharmakos and pharmakous have the same meaning in this verse, since Wiccans use magic arts and engage in idolatry, the latter of which the article did not even address. They are covered in Revelation 21:8. One passage the article did not address is Revelation 9:21, which says, neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. The Greek word used for sorceries is pharmakeia, and means sorcery or magic. Another thing the article sidesteps is the fact that Wiccans engage in idolatry, that is, the worship of false gods and goddesses. The Bible condemns idolatry on several occasions. The Bible teaches there is only one true God. I now want to share what various canons of the Church have said about some of these things. Canon 36 of the Council of Laodicea states that members of the sacerdocy and clerics must not be magicians or enchanters or mathematicians, that is, numerologists or astrologers, or make what are called amulets, which are shackles for their souls. Accordingly, we have bidden those wearing these things to be thrown out of the Church. St. Basil's Canon 65 states, as for anyone practicing incantation or sorcery, he shall be allotted the time of a murderer, it being proportioned to him in such a manner as though he had convicted himself of each sin for a year. St. Basil's Canon 72 states, anyone who places himself in the hands of fortune-tellers or any other such persons professing to foresee future events or to discover the whereabouts of lost property, of persons in hiding, etc., he shall be sentenced to the same penalty as is prescribed for murderers, and shall do the same length of time and the same penances. St. Gregory of Nyssa's Canon 3 discusses those who go to sorcerers or soothsayers. St. John the Faster's Canon 32 deals with people professing enchantery or sorcery. Canon 61 of the Council of Trullo deals with people who consult soothsayers, fortune-tellers, enchanters, and amuletics. Canon 24 of the Council of Ancura states, as for those who are practicing divination and continuing the customs of the heathen, and who are introducing persons into their homes with a view to discovering sorceries, or even with a view to purification, let them fall under the canon of 5 years in accordance with the fixed degrees, 3 years of kneeling, and 2 years of prayer without oblation. Canon 92 of the Regional Council of Carthage states, it has pleased the council to decree that a request be presented to the most glorious emperors in order to have the remains of idolatry, not only as regards those embodied in images of idols, but also those in any kind of places, whether groves or trees, by all means wiped out. Thank you for watching. See the description box for more information.